Uh, I'm really happy to be joined by Meenu, and we are going to have this chat, Meenu. Meenu, you work in the disability space. I wanted to understand from you, just generally, are organizations even aware of the various disability types that exist? How many disability types are recognized, and are organizations even aware of disabilities? And when we speak about corporate India, do they even know about it?
Thank you, Harish. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Economic Times, for organizing this and inviting us to be here. So, Harish, to your question, whether corporates are really aware, I have spent 14 years. The views that I will share are my personal and not necessarily representing State Street's views, uh, but they are based on my experience, having worked with one corporate for 12 years and another for 2 years, and having interacted with many corporates in many industry forums. A lot of people reach out. So, what happens is that people are at companies and organizations are at different stages of awareness. So those who started their journey long ago, they are aware because they started small. They started with what they call quote unquote low hanging fruits, which means only people with physical disability, because they thought that would be easy to accommodate, gradually moving to other sensory disabilities like hearing and vision. And any new organization, even till today, in 2016, Government of India passed the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, which recognizes 21 disabilities. There are many more disabilities even beyond those 21 disabilities. But most corporates, when they're starting their journey, they're not even aware that there are so many types of disabilities. Where do they start? They think ramp, JAWS, sign language interpretation, and that is where it ends and it begins and it ends. So, so as I said, that there are different stages they go through, but I definitely see that there is this change that is happening where there is more willingness to learn, there is openness to know more. But when you are starting the implementation process, you want to go slow. You don't want to go all hog because you're scared of making mistakes. So, which them from branding themselves as disabled friendly organization or going for disabilities which are not the typical ones, which is physical and blindness and hearing. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And it's so important that we recognize that the different organizations at different stages of understanding itself. So when we speak about, so we are still in the advocacy stage. That's what I believe, right? I mean, we haven't really, if you look at corporate India as a whole, we haven't really gone to the implementation stage as of now. It's still the advocacy within corporates itself, where they are still trying to understand that there are these, even those 21 types. I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine where he was telling me that, okay, I never knew that acid attack survivors could also be a part of disabilities. They're included in the 21 types of disability. So I know that it's a long journey, and I dread a day when we actually think that we have reached somewhere, because I think it's a continuous journey when it comes to
Totally.
disabilities, or whether it even comes to LGBT rights. You know, beyond access, as an organization, we are very mindful. We have a line which actually says, come as you are, so that we respect people the way they are, whether it's a person with disability, whether the person happens to be a woman, whether a person a person is a trans person. I personally belong to the LGBT community. I'm gay and I'm gender fluid. So I think one of the things that is most important, Dr. Meenu, is intentionality, isn't it? I mean, you just need to be intentional. You'll always be in some path reaching somewhere,
Yes.
but it's important to put. I mean, in Access, of course, we have this line called "They'll say open," but beyond that, we also have this "Come as you are" as a line which we actually put over there. Of course, we need to have jobs which are specific to various people, but it's also important to say that all our jobs are open to everybody.
Right.
We will be in journeys. I mean, we might learn, there might be a few things that unfold. We might discover that we are wrong, that we might discover that we have to do better in various fields. But to intentionally get on that path for every corporate becomes very important.
So let me ask you this question, Harish. What do you think is the role of policies and systems in promoting inclusion at workplace?
I think policies, Dr. Meenu, is the basis on which, like for instance, there are organizations. Just by saying, you'll think that these are empty words when you actually say that we respect people. And the reason why I'm able to speak as a queer person is because I have a dress code policy at work. I am able to bring my whole self to work. We have a policy, we have a human rights policy at work. So it's important to say that respect is not a choice, and it's important to put that in those many words. And those are the basis on which various other things you can build the organizational framework on. The basis, at least the base work, is that of policies. I remember this very funny incident. I was 1 week in the organization, and I remember my head of HR, Raj Kamal, had called me to the room, and she looked at me and she was like, "Why are you dressed like this?" Because I went dressed in a three-piece suit, and I thought that I looked quite sexy in that. So I went dressed in a three-piece suit, bought a new one, a pink one, right? So I had to show some stereotype somewhere. So I went over there and I sat over there in front of her, and she was like, "Why are you dressed like this? Why are you dressed like this?" I was like, I just started checking, have I dropped some food? Or is my fly right? Or is my coat right? Have I tucked in well? And she looked at me and she said, "Harish, I didn't want you to fit in. I wanted you to stand out. Be different, be who you are. Don't try to become one of us. We all are different." And I think that is what policy. And of course, I went dressed in a salwar kameez to work only after I changed the dress code policy. Just because I have this proximity with the head HR doesn't mean that only I get to do that. Everyone should get to do that. So we changed the dress code policy, and we included a policy for gender fluid and gender non-conforming, transgender, and all kinds of people. And then we changed that. So I think once you have, it's like, what's the use of changing the law in the country, right?
Right.
You Once you have that, on that you can do far more welfare mechanisms, ma'am. Intentional welfare is the wrong word. To do intentional changes within the organization and to build equity becomes extremely important on that.
Yeah, I so agree with you because in my experience, I remember when I had joined my previous company, the first 3 months was like such a struggle. And I had told them that diversity and inclusion is not about numbers alone. Numbers you will get if you have policies and systems in place. Because if you do not have those in place, that means you are still discriminating. That means equity is at the mercy of the manager, and policies empower everybody because you are informing and are being intentional about it.
True, true. And it's not a do good exercise, na. I
Yeah.
mean, like for instance, it's not that I go to the temple or the church or the masjid on Friday, and I also make some, I help persons with disability and LGBT people. It's not your do good deed. What I mean, I wanted to ask you, mostly when it comes to persons with disability, the intentionality is there, but there's also a lot of patronizing, right? So sometimes it is, how do we shift from do good to do right? Not this do gooder attitude. okay, this is my good deed of the day. This is not the good deed of the day. This is the right thing to do, and you need to do that. How do organizations shift from this to that?
See, as I said, it's a journey that the organizations have to go through. And also, the problem with our society in general is that we tend to stereotype. Okay. And so either we don't put people with disabilities on a spectrum, but we put them on two different sides of the spectrum, either this or that. So either you are incapable or you are super capable. Either you have no ability or you have overcome your disability. Now, disability
Oh,
is your
which is that
identity.
funny word, sixth sense.
Yeah,
I
sixth
hear that
sense.
all the
Correct.
time.
Sixth sense. And that if one part of your body is not working, then some other part overcompensates for it. And that's how you overcome your disability. Disability is so much a part of your day to day reality that you can never overcome it. You live with it. It's an identity. And when that identity is recognized in a dignified way, and you are able to bring your whole selves to work, you start taking pride in that identity. You are no longer ashamed of it. You are no longer wanting to fit in, be normal like everyone else, because you take pride in that difference. Because your difference, your lived experience enriches you, and it enriches the organization in return.
Yeah.
So they bring a
I
lot
mean,
of value through the lived experience.
yeah, but what is normal anyways, you know? I mean,
That's
I
it.
think normal is the biggest stereotype. We all should not be normal. In fact, everyone who's listening to this, please don't be normal. Be different. I mean, and embrace the fact that you're different. If we all were normal, then we live in a very abnormal world, I would say. You know?
Correct. To that, I have a question for you, Harish. Do you think having the lived experience of any kind of marginalization um, makes you a stronger advocate or champion of inclusion? Or do you think that that is looked upon as activism and not appreciated? What are your views? What is your experience?
I think lived experiences are important and they are imperative. Now, I can empathize, but your empathy would fail after a certain point. Like I have a sister who's hearing impaired, who so I first you struggle with the language. What is the right language to use? What is the right language that she would appreciate, right? So I think your lived experience is the fulcrum on which everything else grows. And I can never now I can probably empathize with a person with gender dysphoria, with a person who is a person with deafness, a person who had sight issues, but the truth is I can never live that life. Your empathy would also fail, your human empathy would also fail. And that's why it's important to get people with lived experiences on roles so that it becomes an enriching experience for all able-bodied and cisgendered heterosexual people. And we don't exist, and it's important to, while we do that, it's important to adopt an intersectional approach to the whole thing. I fight with my sister, and sometimes she is the nastiest sister available on planet Earth, right? And we need to call up that she doesn't become very nice and very wonderful because she's a person who has deafness, right? So it's important to recognize people as people, and only when I had the lived experience, probably I wouldn't have. It would have taken me much more effort to understand, but I have a lived experience of living with somebody who is a person with disability. My sister has a lived experience of living with somebody who happens to be queer. So she recognizes that she's privileged in some point. I recognize that there are some points which I'm not exposed to. Moving from privilege to a point of understanding becomes extremely important. We have to move ahead from simply acceptance to making people a part. Tokenism say to come to a point where we make people a part of the entire thing, where we recognize everyone is different. We all are different in some way. I think that becomes extremely important. And yes, sometimes it's seen as activism, and I think there needs to be more activists at the workplace, more activists for the right things. Why shouldn't there be more activists at the, and organizations should rise up and look at healthy debates as a way to wait. And it's not that things in access or anywhere happens without a debate or a discussion. There are times there are different contra points of views. There are some times when we have these discussions, we hear things where the language that we use sometimes is incorrect. But it's important to tell the person politely, where we need to sometimes lower our guard of being activists and doing all this and getting angsty all the time. But say it politely and always be willing to change. Organizations need to be willing to change. I remember my executive director calling me up and asking me one day, what is the right word to use? Is this the right word to use? Now, one is somebody can just blow up and say, "Oh, you didn't know this," or the other thing is to sit down and say that, "No, this is a preferred word that you could use, like differently abled. Include this as a sustainability goal. Include this as being gender friendly, being disabled, being access positive. Make all of this a part of your larger goal, because for sure stakeholders and other stakeholders, shareholders, all of them are looking at these things, and I wish that they look at it with more intent as well, so that we all get better. I mean, I'd love a space where we have every bank in the BFSI sector competing with each other on who can be better, right? That's a good competition to have with everyone, and not just one bank or one player in the ecosystem. Let us fight on these things. Let us see who's better. Let's have these discussions and debates, and let's outsmart each other so that we all can get better and build a um, uh, far lovely ecosystem. So I'm not even saying employee resource groups within organizations. I think employee resource groups within sectors is important. So I think we need to expand that also, make it more democratic over a period of time.
That's so true. That's really. Uh, do we have time for any more questions? I just wanted to have a pulse check. We have? Okay, wonderful. So, are there any questions from the audience before I shoot? No questions as yet. Okay, okay, great. So, Harish, I had one more question. Uh, how much involvement of senior leadership is critical um, in going beyond the dimensions of gender and race, and thinking from the perspective of A, intersectionality, and B, this whole issue of power and privilege? Is the senior leadership sensitized enough? Do they understand? Is there buy-in required? And what role do they play, the top leadership?
I think one of the main things, Meenu, very important question. One of the main senior leadership, in make this a non-negotiable. First of all, I mean, to tie in the senior, because you require the senior leadership to make respect a non-negotiable within the organization, whatever the dimensions of respect would be. Make access a non-negotiable, right? And once you have that as the base, and the senior leadership is bought in, then kind of use that voice of the senior leadership to ensure that people have the choice within the organization. Like people, because not everything looks black and white. When we speak about intersectionality, we need to understand that if there is a trans man whose sex assigned at birth was female, who lives the life, who is a man, who is also a person with disability, who also belongs to a marginalized community. Imagine the layers of discrimination that person has fought to reach the door of your organization. right? So if you're going to put that person at par with somebody else who is born of privilege, it might not be that. So to have equity before equality, you require the senior leadership's buy-in, so that you build, because for the naked eye it'll all look very partial on why you are doing all these things for trans people, why you're doing this, when looking beyond the spectrum, and not make it another campaign where before the before in the month of June and now in the month of September everything turns rainbow, but nothing really happens on ground. So I think it becomes very important. The Times of India had the Out and Proud campaign at some point. So just speaking from the LGBTQ space, because that's a space that I knew beyond Access as well. I think it's important that you buy in the senior leadership, so that you make respect a non-negotiable, and on that basis, on that foundation, you start building on equity for various things, because you require, because this will go, there will be cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied men who will stand up and say, "Oh, why is this person given a privilege over the other?" But it's not privilege. Equity is not privilege. Affirmative action is the way. I hate the word reservation. I prefer affirmative action, because you're actually doing something right to the wrong that you have done since ages. So I think it's important that senior leadership are bought into that. Mhm.
Great. I agree. Also, in my view, what also happens is that uh, what you do internally in terms of policies, systems in place, but the external environment continues to remain the same. The external environment in which you operate. So, for example, when I look at disability, for example, the dropout rate of children with disabilities is much higher compared to children without disabilities. The educational opportunities continue to remain very limited for them. Workplaces will have people only who have higher education, have certain degrees, and then they keep saying that there is very limited talent pool, there is no talent pool. Uh, I think, in my view, it's very important that the community initiatives also get tied into that to address the inequality that exists in the society, in the community, whether using your CSR monies, whether you're so removing the barriers to education, to access, to so I remember in Emphasis, I had that uh, opportunity where we started Uber Access to remove barriers of transportation in the city of Bangalore, to supporting Museum of Art and Photography, making it India's first accessible, inclusive museum for all kinds of differences. Then looking at reasonable accommodation in universities and colleges, so that students with disabilities, when they come to workplaces, they are ready, rather than continue to struggle with how do I seek reasonable accommodation, and what is reasonable accommodation. What is your view on that? Uh, the external systems and the external barriers that exist in the society.
I think if we don't keep an eye on the floor and on the market, and the way our businesses finally interact with the market outside, and the dimensions over there are changing. So it's not just a HR critical or a do good critical thing. It's a business imperative that you need to keep your eye on the market, and understand that the society is changing, and we need to be mindful of so many things when it comes to the societal parameters. And you spoke about a very important point over here, Dr. Meenu, is about the fact that you know civil society in general. Civil society has been, there are a lot of changes and a lot of challenges that the civil society is facing. We cannot be divorced from it ever. We have to be in tandem with it, and that's why whether it's not just CSR, but it should not be a CSR imperative. It should be a business imperative to keep your eye on the ground and to see how world is changing. Like for instance, again taking an example that 6th of September. Now I know that 6th of September. Now there'll be too many rainbows because that's the Supreme Court verdict on Section 377. There'll be too many rainbows floating on our LinkedIn and our Facebook. How many of them have changed their policies or have thought of changing their policies within the organization? How many of them are speaking about things? How many of them have issued a sorry for things that they have done in the past? You know, being intentional about these things. I think the world is watching, and if you don't get civil partnership, where you don't get civic partnership, where you actually engage with society at large and get them involved in your discussion, because I realized from being in the social sector for so long, coming into the corporate world, I also understand that the corporate world are small cocoons that you live, comfortable cocoons that you live in, and you feel very good about the fact that you're doing something good. But what you're doing is a speck in the universe, and that's important to bring in that humility in recognizing that what you're doing is just a speck in the universe, and you need to do more. You need to be more intentional, and you need to get partners from civil society. And the biggest lie we tell ourselves is there's no talent available in the world. That's the biggest lie we tell ourselves. We have not gone, we want the talent to come to us. We don't want to go to spaces where there is talent available already. We don't go to their spaces. In Access, we have an inclusion statement, something that I've been saying for years, is that the onus of inclusion lies on those who are included, not on those who are excluded. So we can't just wait and keep our door open and say that our door is open for you. We need to go and include them. Go to those spaces, engage with those with nonprofits and civic organizations. Go to schools and colleges where we have where we have women students. Um, be intentional. Say that. I say it out loud in your statements, and that's when you'll this thing. So take up, assume responsibility. Don't pass the buck, and have partnerships with civic. So of course, there will be differences. No one is going to be perfect. I'm the first one to admit that Axis Bank is not perfect, and no organization is so perfect ever. We don't want to be that this thing, because we all are in a journey. We haven't reached the pinnacle and the zenith of anything. We all are in that journey, and we should never assume at any point, because society is a changing phenomena. And the moment we expect and we start believing that we are perfect and we don't want to do anything more because हमने सब कर लिया and we have arrived, I think that's the downfall. That's the day that we start falling. And that's why a year on the ground becomes extremely important. And the year on the ground are these civic societies, the NGOs that we could connect with, using a CSR, but not just a CSR, even a business to drive, because everyone, a rising tide lifts all boats. Okay, and that's important for us to recognize that there is a rising tide right now of all diverse groups coming together. I think that's important, that we rise and we rise to the occasion with the rising tide.
Wonderful. And I so like this line that you mentioned, that the onus of inclusion is on those who are included and not on those who are excluded. So with that, I think I hand it over to Isha.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Meenu Bhambani. It's been a pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much, Harish. You very rightly mentioned how one doesn't need to be normal. It's the pleasure of being different and really embracing that and being proud of who you are. I'd like to thank both of you all for sharing your personal experiences with our audience. We've only got a lot more to learn from you. It's been a pleasure listening to this discussion. And like you said, it's a journey. We haven't reached the destination yet. So corporates need to embrace inclusivity and diversity with full heart to really make sure that their teams learn the fact that it is people that they value. Thank you once again, both of you all, for joining us. And it's been a delight listening to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And as I thank our speakers for having joined us, let me remind our delegates that we have a lot many more sessions lined up for you. Our next session is a keynote address on how to successfully get top leadership engaged in D&I. How can we make D&I more appealing and priority to the C-level? How can we position D&I as the go-to strategy to generate revenue? All this and more. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Ms. Divya Gopalnath, co-founder, Byju's.